Racist bullies target elderly black man, unaware he is a retired federal judge. It was early in the morning, and the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood were still wrapped in the gentle light of dawn. The air was cool, the kind of fresh that seemed to breathe life into everything it touched. Mr. Thompson, an elderly black man, was out for his usual walk. He had been living in this neighborhood for years, and though many of the newer residents had never got to know him, he was a well-respected figure in the area. He walked slowly but with purpose, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement with every step. At 78 years old, his body had slowed, but his mind remained sharp, always alert, always aware. His dark skin was marked with the passage of time, wrinkles around his eyes, and his silver hair told the story of a man who had seen much in his life. But even in his advanced years, there was something about him that demanded respect. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence that surrounded him like an invisible force field. As he made his way down the block, he passed by row after row of well-kept homes, each one with its own story. Some of these homes were new, and the families who lived in them had just recently moved in. They didn't know Mr. Thompson, and for the most part, they didn't seem to care. They were too busy with their own lives, too wrapped up in their routines. But not everyone in the neighborhood was busy with their own lives. A small group of young men, all in their late teens or early 20s, were hanging out near the corner of the street. They were new to the neighborhood, having just moved in with their families. They were loud and boisterous, full of energy, and they had little respect for anyone or anything. They saw Mr. Thompson walking alone, and for some reason they decided he was an easy target. One of the young men, the tallest of the group, nudged his friend and pointed towards Mr. Thompson. "Look at this guy," he said with a laugh. "He looks like he's about to fall over any minute." The others chuckled, as if the joke was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Mr. Thompson, for his part, didn't react. He kept walking, his eyes straight ahead. He had learned long ago not to engage with people who wanted to stir trouble, but the young men didn't take that as a hint. They followed him, their footsteps growing louder, their voices growing more insistent. "Hey, old man," one of them shouted, a sneer in his voice. "You lost? Need help crossing the street?" Mr. Thompson continued walking, the sound of their taunts echoing behind him. He didn't let it bother him. He had been called worse in his life. He had faced prejudice and injustice time and time again, both in and out of the courtroom, and he wasn't about to let some young punks ruin his morning walk. But as he walked, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. It seemed like the world had changed, but in some ways it hadn't changed at all. The group of young men began to pick up their pace, drawing closer to him. They started making more aggressive comments, thinking it was funny. "What's with the cane, huh?" one of them asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Can't walk without that thing, can you?" Mr. Thompson still didn't respond. He had been through much worse in his life. He had seen the ugly face of racism, the kind that made people look down on him just because of the color of his skin. He had fought battles in courtrooms, making decisions that impacted lives, and he had witnessed the struggles of countless individuals who faced prejudice every day. But none of that made him bitter. In fact, it was the very reason he chose not to engage with the ignorance he faced now. As he walked, the group of young men became bolder. One of them stepped up to him, pushing him lightly in the shoulder. "You better watch where you're going, old man," he said with a smirk. The others laughed, egging him on. They thought it was funny, thinking that because he was older and alone, he was an easy target. Mr. Thompson paused for a moment, his cane resting gently on the ground. He could feel the tension in the air, the shift from casual teasing to something more serious. But instead of getting angry, he simply turned his head slowly to face the young man who had shoved him. "Young man," Mr. Thompson said quietly, his voice steady but firm. "You might think it's funny, but it's not. I've lived a long life, and I've been through much worse than your childish taunts." The group of young men fell silent for a moment. They were surprised by his calmness, by the way he didn't seem rattled by their behavior. They expected him to get angry, to yell at them or fight back, but Mr. Thompson didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, he stood there unshaken, looking at each of them with steady eyes. "Why don't you show some respect?" he continued, his voice still calm. "You might think you're tough, but there's more to life than picking on someone who's older than you. I've been a judge, and I've seen a lot of people like you, people who think they can get away with disrespecting others. But let me tell you something. You'll never truly be strong until you learn how to respect others." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the young men didn't know how to respond. They had expected him to be an easy target, but instead they were faced with something they didn't understand. A man who had lived a life of purpose, a man who had seen and experienced much more than they ever would. They looked at him, unsure of what to say next. For a brief second, one of the young men seemed to reconsider his actions. He took a step back, his expression shifting from one of arrogance to one of uncertainty. The others, too, were silent now, their earlier bravado fading away. But Mr. Thompson didn't wait for an apology or expect anything from them. He simply turned and began walking again, the rhythm of his cane tapping against the pavement as he moved. He wasn't interested in teaching them a lesson through anger or punishment. He had learned long ago that wisdom was the greatest tool to change a person's heart. As he walked away, the young men stood in silence, watching him go. They didn't fully understand what had just happened, but something inside them had shifted. They had expected a confrontation, a moment where they could prove their dominance. Instead, they had encountered a man who had seen through their ignorance, who had stood his ground without raising his voice. Mr. Thompson's calm presence lingered in their minds as they slowly drifted away. They had just learned a lesson, not from anger or force, but from the quiet strength of a man who had lived a life of dignity and respect. The group of young men stood still for a few moments, unsure of what had just happened. They had expected an old man to be afraid or to yell at them, but instead, they had faced a calm and dignified individual who didn't seem bothered by their taunts at all. The situation felt strange, almost surreal. They had pushed him, mocked him, and called him names, but nothing seemed to faze him. The more they thought about it, the more confused they became. One of the young men, a tall, broad-shouldered guy named Jason, felt a knot in his stomach. He had been the one to push Mr. Thompson, and the way the elderly man had looked at him, without fear or anger, unsettled him. Jason had always been the leader of the group, the one who made the jokes and got the laughs. But now, standing there in the quiet street, he began to question why he had acted the way he did. Was it really funny to pick on an elderly man just because he looked weak? The silence stretched on, and Jason glanced at his friends, expecting one of them to break the tension. But they were all standing there, staring at the ground or at Mr. Thompson's retreating figure, as if they were unsure of what to do next. Jason took a step forward. "Hey, we should probably leave him alone," he muttered, his voice quieter than before. But his words were almost drowned out by the sound of the others shuffling behind him. "Yeah," another of the young men, Dave, said, his voice unsure. "That guy, he's not someone we want to mess with." The others nodded reluctantly. None of them had expected Mr. Thompson to react the way he did. They had hoped for a quick laugh, something that would make them feel powerful and in control. Instead, they were left with a sense of guilt they couldn't shake. They realized they had crossed a line. They hadn't just teased an old man. They had disrespected someone who, in that brief moment, showed them a level of strength they didn't fully understand. But as they began to walk away, there was still an underlying tension. Jason felt like they hadn't gotten away with it yet, even though Mr. Thompson had already left. They hadn't apologized, and Jason knew deep down that they needed to make things right. They began to head toward the park where they usually hung out. The group was mostly quiet now, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Jason was the first to speak up again. "We were wrong. I shouldn't have pushed him. That was stupid," he admitted, his voice low and sincere. His friends didn't respond immediately. They were still processing the encounter, still trying to understand why they had been so quick to judge someone they didn't know. Dave was the next to speak. "You think he's right?" Dave asked, glancing over at Jason. "I mean, maybe he really has been through a lot. But I don't know, it's like he didn't care, he didn't even get mad." Jason shrugged. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe he's seen enough to know that getting mad doesn't solve anything. Maybe he's just not bothered by us." Another of the group, Mark, who had been quieter throughout the whole encounter, spoke up. "I've never seen anyone like him. He wasn't scared or anything. I think we should apologize, at least for what we did." The idea of apologizing seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as though it was both the right thing to do and the hardest thing they could consider. They had never had to apologize for something like this before. Most of the time, they could get away with their jokes and jabs, but this time, something felt different. They all agreed it was the right thing to do, but none of them were quite sure how to approach it. Later that day, as the sun began to set and the neighborhood grew quieter, the young men gathered by the park, talking amongst themselves about what had happened earlier. Jason, who had been the first to speak up, looked at his friends and took a deep breath. "I think we should go find him," he said. "Not to fight him or anything, but to apologize. We were out of line." The others exchanged uncertain glances but nodded. They agreed that it was the right thing to do, even though it was uncomfortable. They had made a mistake, and they needed to make amends. After some searching, they finally found Mr. Thompson sitting on a bench near the park, enjoying the cool evening breeze. He had his cane beside him, and his hands were folded on his lap. His calm presence seemed unchanged from their earlier encounter. Jason took a deep breath and approached him first. "Mr. Thompson, sir," he said softly, not wanting to startle him. Mr. Thompson looked up, his gaze steady and kind. He didn't seem surprised to see them, though his eyes held a trace of curiosity. "Is there something you need, young man?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice gentle. Jason hesitated, but then spoke up. We wanted to apologize for how we acted earlier. We were wrong, and I shouldn't have pushed you or said those things. You didn't deserve that." The group stood behind Jason, each of them looking at the ground, unable to meet Mr. Thompson's gaze. They were ashamed of what they had done, but they were grateful that he hadn't reacted with anger or aggression. They knew they had crossed a line, and now they hoped that their apology would be enough to make things right. "Mr. Thompson looked at them for a long moment, his face calm and thoughtful. He didn't immediately accept their apology, but he didn't reject it either. Instead, he nodded slowly and spoke with a wisdom that only came from years of experience. "I appreciate your honesty, young man," he said. "But you must understand something. We all make mistakes. We all say things we do mean. What matters is what we do afterward. You came here to apologize, and that shows me something. It shows me that you have the capacity to grow, to learn, and to be better. That's more than most people can say." The young men stood in silence, reflecting on his words. They had expected anger or maybe even a lecture, but instead, Mr. Thompson had given them something they hadn't anticipated, a lesson in humility and grace. "Thank you," Jason said, his voice softer than before. "We won't forget this." With that, the group slowly turned to leave, feeling lighter than when they had come. They had apologized, but more importantly, they had learned something important. They had learned the value of respect, and how quickly that respect could be lost with thoughtless words and actions. As they walked away, Jason looked at his friends, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like they had done something right. It wasn't just about saying the words. It was about understanding their meaning and taking responsibility for their actions. They had a long way to go, but this moment, this quiet apology, was a step in the right direction. The next day, the young men woke up with something on their minds. The events from the previous afternoon kept replaying in their thoughts, and it wasn't just about what had happened with Mr. Thompson. It was the way he had made them feel, like they had crossed a line they didn't even know existed, and yet, instead of fighting back or showing anger, he had responded with calmness and dignity. It was a feeling they hadn't expected to have. They had expected him to be upset, or perhaps to react in a way that would have made them feel justified in their actions. But he hadn't. Instead, he had made them question their own behavior, and for the first time in a long time, they didn't know how to feel about themselves. Jason, who had taken the lead in apologizing, was still troubled by the encounter. He hadn't expected Mr. Thompson's response to be so calm. He had expected to feel some sense of relief after the apology, but he didn't. In fact, he felt more unsettled than ever. The more he thought about it, the more he realized just how wrong they had been. Mr. Thompson wasn't just an old man walking through the neighborhood. He was someone who had seen and experienced far more than any of them, and yet he didn't hold it against them. Jason couldn't help but admire him for that. Jason's thoughts were interrupted by a text from Mark, one of the quieter members of the group. The message was short, but it caught Jason's attention. "Do you think he'll tell anyone about what happened yesterday?" Jason frowned at the question. He hadn't thought about that. In the moment, it seemed like Mr. Thompson wasn't interested in causing trouble, but what if he decided to report them? What if their behavior had crossed a line that could have consequences? Jason quickly texted back. "I don't think he will. He seemed like the type who wouldn't want to make a big deal out of it." Mark's reply came almost immediately. "Yeah, but I still feel like we should make it up to him somehow. I don't know if saying sorry is enough." Jason agreed. Saying sorry had been a good first step, but it felt like it wasn't enough to truly make things right. It felt like they needed to do more to show Mr. Thompson that they had learned something from the experience. But what could they do? What could they offer a man who had already shown them kindness and understanding, despite their behavior? Later that afternoon, Jason met with the group at the park, just like they had agreed the day before. Mark, Dave, and the others were already there, sitting on the same bench where they had talked about apologizing to Mr. Thompson. Jason could tell that they were all still thinking about the encounter. They didn't know how to move forward from it. "I was thinking about what we should do," Jason started, sitting down with them. "We can't just leave it at an apology. That doesn't seem like enough." "Yeah," Dave agreed. "But what else can we do? He didn't seem like the type who wants anything from us." "That's the thing," Jason said, his voice thoughtful. "We don't know much about him, but we know that he's had a life full of experiences, a life where he's seen things we could never understand. And yet he didn't lash out at us. He didn't try to make us feel guilty or anything. He just told us what we needed to hear, and that was it. So I think we should show him that we understand, that we're not just saying sorry, but that we really get it." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "But how do we do that?" Jason looked around at the group. "What if we helped him out somehow? Maybe he needs something that we can do for him. Maybe it's as simple as offering him help with something, like carrying his groceries or something like that. We've got to show him we respect him, not just say it." The others looked at each other, considering this idea. They hadn't really thought about showing respect through actions. They had just assumed that apologizing with words was enough, but Jason's idea made sense. Actions spoke louder than words, if they wanted to show Mr. Thompson that they truly understood the lesson he had taught them. They needed to do something for him, something that demonstrated their respect. Later that afternoon, they found Mr. Thompson sitting on a bench in the park, just like he had been the day before. This time, though, the group approached him with a sense of purpose. They weren't just walking by, trying to avoid eye contact. This time, they had a goal. They wanted to make things right. Jason walked up to him first, just as he had done the day before. But this time, his approach was different. There was no hesitation in his steps, no awkwardness in his voice. He was ready. "Mr. Thompson," Jason said, his voice respectful. "We wanted to apologize again, but we also wanted to show you that we understand what you were trying to teach us. So, we'd like to help you with something, anything you need." Mr. Thompson looked up at them, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the group stood in silence, unsure of how he would respond. But then he smiled, a small, kind smile that seemed to take away the tension in the air. "Young man, you've already done more than enough by coming back and showing me that you care. But if you truly want to help, I'll tell you what you can do." Mr. Thompson's voice was calm, but there was a certain warmth in it that made Jason feel like they were on the right path. "I'd like it very much if you could help me with some things around my house. I've been getting a little older, and some tasks have become a bit more difficult. But I don't want to ask anyone. I'm not one to ask for help, but I think you might understand the value of giving help, now that you've learned the lesson you needed to learn." Jason's heart lifted with relief. This was exactly what they needed to do. It wasn't just about showing up and saying the right words. It was about taking action, about making up for their mistake by doing something that mattered. And what mattered more than offering a helping hand to someone who had already shown them so much respect? The group agreed to help with whatever Mr. Thompson needed. Over the next few days, they visited him regularly, helping him with small tasks around his house, carrying groceries, fixing things that had been broken for a while, even just sitting with him for a conversation. And with every task they completed, they felt the weight of their earlier actions lifting from their shoulders. They weren't just apologizing anymore. They were proving through their actions that they had learned something valuable. They were showing Mr. Thompson the respect he deserved. As the days passed, the bond between the group and Mr. Thompson grew stronger. They saw him not as an elderly man to be ignored, but as a person with a wealth of experience, a man who had lived a life worth respecting. And through this process, they learned more than they ever expected. They learned about the power of kindness, humility, and the value of taking responsibility for their actions. By the time they had finished helping Mr. Thompson with the things he needed, they knew that they had made things right, not just by apologizing, but by showing up and doing something that truly mattered. As the days passed, Jason and his friends continued to visit Mr. Thompson. They helped him with tasks around his home, fixed small things that had been broken for years, and even ran errands for him when needed. But more than that, they started to learn about his life, the kind of man he had been, and the experiences that had shaped him. One afternoon, after finishing a few repairs around the house, they sat with Mr. Thompson on his front porch, enjoying the warmth of the setting sun. Mr. Thompson had invited them to sit down, offering them cold drinks as a sign of gratitude. It was the first time they had truly spent time with him without any agenda other than to talk. "Thank you for helping me," Mr. Thompson said as he took a sip from his glass. "You know, when you first came by, I didn't think you would return. I didn't think you would really understand, but it's clear to me now that you're different, and that's something I respect." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected Mr. Thompson to say anything like that, and it made him realize just how much they had grown in such a short time. He had expected their actions to be just a way to make up for their earlier mistakes, but Mr. Thompson's words were making him see things differently. It wasn't just about righting a wrong, it was about learning from it and becoming better people in the process. "I didn't think we would come back either," Jason admitted. "But after everything that happened, I couldn't stop thinking about it. We were wrong. And we needed to make it right, not just with words but with actions." Mr. Thompson smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with warmth. "That's the true meaning of respect, son. It's easy to say the right things, but it's harder to show it through your actions. You're on the right path." The others, sitting silently, nodded in agreement. They had all been learning something from Mr. Thompson, something they hadn't expected to learn when they first decided to apologize. They had thought that helping with small tasks would be enough, but in spending time with Mr. Thompson, they were learning much more about life, dignity, and the power of respect. As the afternoon wore on, Mr. Thompson began to share stories about his life. He told them about his time as a federal judge, about the challenges he had faced in the courtroom, and the battles he had fought for justice. He spoke about the many people he had encountered in his career, both the ones he had helped and the ones he had been forced to pass judgment on. "The law is a powerful thing," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady and thoughtful. "But it's not enough to simply follow the rules. You have to understand the people behind those rules. The law must be fair, yes, but it must also be compassionate." Jason and his friends listened intently, fascinated by the wisdom that came from years of experience. They had never really thought about the law in such a personal way. They had always seen it as something distant, something that existed in textbooks and courtrooms, but never something that affected them directly. Now, hearing Mr. Thompson talk about it with such passion, they began to understand how deeply it impacted lives, how it could be both a source of hope and, at times, a tool of injustice. "I've seen many people come into my courtroom," Mr. Thompson continued. "Some of them were good people who made mistakes. Others were people who took advantage of others, hurt others without a second thought. But no matter who they were, I always tried to understand their story before making my decision. Everyone has a past, a reason for why they do what they do, and sometimes understanding that reason can make all the difference." Jason couldn't help but think about how often he and his friends had judged people without understanding their full story. They had judged Mr. Thompson based on his appearance, assuming that because he was elderly and had a cane, he was weak and easy to pick on. They hadn't stopped to consider who he was, what he had been through, or what he had accomplished in his life. But now, listening to his words, they realized how wrong they had been. Dave, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke up. "I never thought about it like that. I always thought the law was just about punishing people who did wrong. But now it feels like it's about understanding them too." Mr. Thompson nodded. "That's right. The law is not just about punishment. It's about fairness and understanding. It's about giving people a chance to change, to make things right. But in order for that to happen, we have to see them for who they truly are." The conversation went on, with Mr. Thompson sharing more stories from his time as a judge. As the evening drew closer, the group felt a sense of connection to him that they hadn't expected. They had come to his house to make things right, but in doing so, they had learned something far more valuable than they had anticipated. They had learned about empathy, about the importance of understanding others, and about the power of respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the yard, Jason felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't just the satisfaction of having made things right with Mr. Thompson. It was the realization that they had grown as people. They had started off as a group of young men who didn't understand the value of respect or the importance of empathy. But now they were leaving Mr. Thompson's house with something more than a lesson in right and wrong. They were leaving with a new perspective on life. "We've learned a lot from you, Mr. Thompson," Jason said, standing up to leave. "Thank you for everything." Mr. Thompson smiled again, his eyes sparkling with pride. "You've learned more than I ever expected, but remember, life is a journey. You're still young and you've got plenty of time to grow. Just keep your hearts open and you'll do just fine." As they left Mr. Thompson's house that evening, the young men felt a sense of gratitude that they hadn't felt before. They had come to him as a way to make amends, but in the end, he had given them something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly human. They walked down the street, their steps lighter, their hearts fuller, knowing that they had been changed by the kindness and wisdom of a man they had once underestimated. Over the next few weeks, the bond between Jason, his friends, and Mr. Thompson continued to grow. The group of young men, once thoughtless and careless, had changed in ways they never anticipated. They still saw each other regularly, but now their conversations were different. They talked about life, about the lessons they were learning, and about the changes they were making in their own lives. They spent less time joking and mocking, and more time thinking about how they could be better people. Jason had started to feel a shift within himself. He was no longer the same person who had followed his friends without question. He found himself reflecting more deeply on the things Mr. Thompson had said, especially about understanding others and giving people a chance to show who they truly were. Jason realized that he had been quick to judge people in the past, whether it was Mr. Thompson or anyone else. But now, he understood the importance of seeing people beyond their appearances or first impressions. One afternoon, Jason and his friends were sitting at their usual spot in the park. The weather was warm, the sun casting long shadows on the ground. They were talking about their plans for the summer, but Jason could tell that there was a quiet tension among them. It wasn't the kind of tension that came from an argument, but something more subtle, something that had been brewing ever since their last conversation with Mr. Thompson. "I've been thinking," Dave said, breaking the silence. "About what, Mr. Thompson said, "You know, about fairness and understanding. It got me thinking about how I treat people. Sometimes I joke around about people who don't look like me, and I think that's wrong." Jason nodded. "Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. I mean, we've all done it, right? We've all said things about people because they look different or act different, but that's not who they really are." "Exactly," Mark added. "It's like we judge people based on one thing we see, and we don't stop to think about their whole story." I feel like we've been doing that a lot, not just to people we meet, but to everyone around us, even people in our own neighborhood. The conversation lingered in the air, each of them reflecting on their words. The past few weeks had been an awakening for all of them, and it was clear that they were beginning to understand the importance of respect in a deeper way. They had apologized to Mr. Thompson, and they had shown their respect through actions, but it was more than just helping him with tasks. It was about changing their mindset and how they viewed the world and the people in it. "I think it's time we do something more," Jason said, breaking the silence. "We've learned a lot from Mr. Thompson, but I don't think it's enough to just change the way we treat people in our small circle. We should do something that shows what we've learned." The others looked at him, their interest piqued. "I'm thinking," Jason continued, "we could volunteer in the community. We could help out in ways that make a real difference. It doesn't have to be something big, but we could help people in need, even if it's just picking up trash, helping elderly neighbors, or volunteering at a food bank." The idea was simple, but Jason could tell that it resonated with his friends. It wasn't about proving something to others. It wasn't about showing off or trying to make up for the past. It was about taking what they had learned from Mr. Thompson and putting it into action in their community. They had seen the impact of kindness and respect, and now it was time to extend that to others. The group agreed to start small. They would help the elderly neighbors with their yards, help clean up the park, and look for other ways to give back. It wasn't about getting credit or recognition. It was about making the world around them a little better. It was about taking responsibility for their actions and making positive contributions. One Saturday morning, the group met at the park with bags and gloves, ready to clean up the litter that had accumulated over time. They started by picking up trash, but soon they found themselves talking to people in the neighborhood. They spoke to older residents who lived alone, offering help with chores or just having a friendly conversation. Some of the people were surprised at first, not used to seeing young people offer help without being asked. But as the day went on, the neighbors began to open up, grateful for the unexpected kindness. It felt good to give back, to do something selfless. They were no longer the group of boys who only cared about themselves or their own amusement. They were becoming a part of the community, not as troublemakers but as contributors. They realized that respect wasn't just about avoiding harm, it was about actively improving the lives of others. As the weeks passed, their efforts grew. They began to organize community events, like cleanup drives, charity fundraisers, and helping out at local schools. They didn't expect anything in return, but the reward came in the form of the relationships they built and the sense of fulfillment they felt. They didn't need recognition. They knew they were doing the right thing, and that was enough. One day, as Jason was walking with his friends toward Mr. Thompson's house, he reflected on how much had changed. He thought about the day when they had first apologized to Mr. Thompson, unsure of what to expect. Back then, they hadn't understood the full impact of their actions. But now, as they were walking toward his home to check in on him, they felt like different people, people who had learned something that could never be unlearned. When they arrived at Mr. Thompson's house, they found him sitting on the porch, enjoying the afternoon sun. They greeted him warmly, and Mr. Thompson smiled at them, his eyes twinkling with approval. "You've been busy, I see," he said, his voice steady as always. "You've been helping out in the community?" Jason nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Yeah, we've been trying to give back, do what we can. We've learned a lot from you, Mr. Thompson. It's not just about saying sorry, it's about showing we understand." Mr. Thompson looked at them with a soft smile. "I can see that, and I can see that you're all growing. It's not an easy thing to do, to change and become better, but you've done it, and that's something to be proud of." The group sat with him, feeling a sense of gratitude and respect for the man who had opened their eyes to the importance of kindness, understanding, and personal growth. They had started this journey by making a mistake, but in the end, it was a mistake that had led them to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human. It had taught them the power of respect, the value of empathy, and the strength of community. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, the group felt a sense of peace. They had come a long way since that first encounter with Mr. Thompson. They were no longer just a group of young men who thoughtlessly picked on others. They were becoming individuals who understood the importance of respect, not just in words, but in actions. And with that, they knew that their journey had only just begun. As the weeks turned into months, the young men's transformation became more and more evident. What had started as an apology to Mr. Thompson had blossomed into something much deeper. They were no longer just a group of young men who had made mistakes. They were now a group of individuals committed to making a positive impact in their community. They had learned the value of respect, empathy, and understanding. But more than that, they had discovered the importance of taking action, showing through their deeds the lessons they had learned. Jason, Mark, Dave, and the others often met at the park after school or on weekends, planning their next community project. It wasn't always easy. There were times when they were busy with schoolwork, or when they faced challenges organizing events. But they always made time for their mission to give back, because they knew how important it was. They had seen firsthand how small acts of kindness could change people's lives, just as Mr. Thompson's wisdom had changed theirs. One afternoon, as they were walking to the park, they noticed a group of children playing soccer. The kids were laughing, running around the field, and having fun. As Jason watched them, an idea began to form in his mind. He turned to Mark and the others. "Hey, what do you think about setting up a youth sports program for the kids in the neighborhood?" he asked. "I've seen a lot of kids here with nothing to do, and maybe we could organize some games or practices. It could be a way to bring the community together and keep the kids active." The others looked at each other, nodding in agreement. They liked the idea. Not only would it give the kids something fun and positive to do, but it would also be a way to get more people involved in the community. They could use the skills they had learned in organizing their previous projects and apply them to something that would help the younger generation. Over the next few days, they worked on their plan. They spoke to the parents of the children, asking for their support. They found a local community center that offered space for practices. They even reached out to local businesses for donations, asking for things like soccer balls, cones, and other equipment they could use. It was hard work, but they were determined to make it happen. The program started small, just a few kids showing up for soccer games on Saturday mornings. But it quickly grew. Word spread through the neighborhood that there was a fun, safe place for kids to come together and play sports. The group of young men acted as coaches, guiding the kids in drills and games, teaching them teamwork and good sportsmanship. They found that they enjoyed it as much as the kids did, laughing and cheering them on during every game. Through their sports program, they connected with even more members of the community, both adults and children. Parents who had once been skeptical of the young men's intentions saw the positive impact they were having, and they started volunteering too. Soon it wasn't just Jason and his friends working hard, it was the whole neighborhood. People began to show up to help, whether it was by donating supplies, cooking meals for the kids, or simply offering encouragement. The whole community began to feel like one big team. It wasn't just about the games, though. As the program grew, the young men found themselves taking on other projects as well. They helped build a small garden at the local community center where kids could learn about growing their own food. They organized a community picnic where families from all walks of life came together to share a meal, enjoy music, and bond over common interests. They even started offering tutoring for students who needed help with their schoolwork. As the months went by, they began to notice something else. People in the community were starting to look out for one another. When someone was in need, there was always someone willing to help. When a neighbor was going through a difficult time, others stepped in to support them. It wasn't just about the young men anymore. It was about the whole neighborhood coming together, united by a sense of shared responsibility and care for each other. One evening, as they sat on the steps of the community center after a successful soccer game, Jason looked around at his friends and the people who had come to support the program. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. "I can't believe how far we've come," Jason said, his voice filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. "I remember when we first met Mr. Thompson, and we were just a group of guys who didn't know any better. We didn't understand respect or empathy or what it really meant to give back." Mark smiled. "Yeah, we were pretty clueless back then, but now look at us. We've turned this whole neighborhood around. It's not just about the sports program anymore. It's about the way we've brought people together, the way we've shown that we care." Dave, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "It's not just about us, though. It's about everyone here. We're all part of something bigger now. We've learned that we don't have to do everything on our own. We can work together, help each other, and make this place better." Jason nodded in agreement. "That's what Mr. Thompson taught us. It's not enough to just apologize for what we've done. It's about taking responsibility and showing through our actions that we understand. It's about making a real difference, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of everyone around us." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the community center, the young men sat in silence, reflecting on how much they had grown. They had come a long way since the day they had bullied Mr. Thompson. They had learned lessons that had changed their lives and the lives of those around them, and they knew that this was only the beginning. When they first apologized to Mr. Thompson, they had no idea that their actions would lead them to this point. They had thought they were simply making up for their mistake, but in the process, they had discovered something far more important: the power of community, the importance of empathy, and the value of taking responsibility for one's actions. They had learned that respect wasn't just about saying the right things, it was about living those values every day. Mr. Thompson, the man they had once disrespected, had become their teacher in a way they never expected. His wisdom, his calm demeanor, and his ability to see beyond the surface had shown them a new way of looking at the world. They had started by apologizing to him, but in the end, it was his lessons that had shaped them into better people. As the last of the children ran off the field and the evening grew quieter, Jason and his friends stood up. They had come a long way, but there was still so much more to do. The community they had helped build was stronger than ever, and they were more determined than ever to continue making a difference. The lessons they had learned from Mr. Thompson would stay with them forever. They had learned that true strength wasn't about being tough or winning every battle. It was about showing kindness, giving back, and treating others with respect. And with that knowledge, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked away from the community center that evening, they knew that their journey was far from over. They had learned the value of respect, and they were committed to living by that lesson every day, no matter where life took them.